So today we're looking at why it's essential that social workers become more engaged with the review. So that's going to be our focus, okay? And it's fair to say that the review's been controversial from the outset, from choosing the chair, Josh McAllister, to concerns around its independence, concerns, for example, there may be a drive to split off child protection intervention and support. The interim report came out, the case for change came out in June this year, and many welcomed its focus on highlighting difficulties within the system, wherever others also were concerned about the lack of focus on austerity, children's rights, and some even felt that it was too blaming on individual social workers and cash-strapped local authorities. BASW England consulted our members for a response to the case for change. I'll put the links, Becca will put those links, and the links to 10 priorities for the review and BASW England's response, and put the links in the chat. But one resounding issue from the response was that many social work practitioners were unaware of the review. They felt that it may have a predetermined plan and so they're powerless to alter its trajectory, or they felt they didn't have enough time to engage with it. So we organised this lunchtime get-together as a forum to hear from different perspectives on why we must better engage with the review. And we're going to hear from Professor Britt Featherstone, who I'm sure many of you will know her work, the work that she's done, including the social model, child protection. Also very grateful to have David Jackson, motivational speaker and author of the book, about his experience in the care system in the 1960s to the 1980s. And last we've got Patrice Bendick, senior practitioner with local authority, looked after children team, author and member of BASW's Black and Ethnic Professional Symposium. So the first 45 minutes will be dedicated to hearing from our speakers, and the final 10 minutes will be saved for questions. Please feel free to share questions throughout, which will feed back to the panel during this time. We're going to encourage everyone to use Twitter during the session. If you want to tweet during the webinar, use the following hashtag of #WhyICare, which is on the screen there. And once again, just to reiterate, this is being recorded, so can people please turn off their cameras and their sounds. And I'm going to provide questions from the chat at the end. So I'm going to hand over now to Professor Britt Featherstone. Thank you.
So I was on mute, I think, so I'll repeat again. Thank you. Thank you to BASW for putting on this event. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to say a few words. And thank you to everyone for taking the time in what are, I know, incredibly busy days, very stressful days at the minute, to listen and come and participate. I'm starting with a quote from a woman I really love. She is a climate change activist. She is also very active against racial injustice in the US. She's an American woman, and she has done an awful lot of work around violence against women. And she talks about, and we use this a lot, and I'll come back to this. We used this a lot, Anna Gupta and I, when we were looking at the BASW adoption inquiry that we did a few years ago, where we were aware that there were multiple voices, a lot of people very angry with each other, a lot of people who didn't necessarily always listen to each other, and a lot of voices that were invalidated. And we found this quote towards the end that argued that who is heard and who is not defines the status quo. And at the time we were doing the adoption inquiry, there were particular voices that were heard and there were others that really weren't. And what we tried to do in the adoption inquiry is bring in new voices, and bring in voices in order to recognise and acknowledge their value. And in so doing, we were saying this tells us something about who's heard, who's valued, and what kind of society we have. And we need to change some of that. In particular, we were particularly concerned about the voices of adopted young people and birth parents at that point. Generally, Rebecca Solomon talks a lot about storytelling, about how as human beings we need to tell stories to make sense of the world for ourselves, to communicate with other people, to articulate moral purpose, and to engage with others in quests to change the world. And she also talks, as I say, about making sure that no one story achieves dominance, and that no one group are the only people who are seen as legitimate or valid in the story. You can take down the quote if you want now, or the slide, if that's okay, Lisa. Thank you. And so she has been very concerned, and I've used her work a lot to think about whose voices are being heard in particular contexts and who is not at the table. And of course, the trouble with not being at the table is that you're very likely to be on the menu if you're not at the table. And that might be something we want to come back to in the context of the review. We've learned a lot in social work over the last 10, 15 years. We know now that we can't, the phrase nothing about us without us. We know how important it is to hear what children have to say about what's going on in children's services and what parents have to tell us. But it looks like today, from what BASW are telling us and from the work they've done, that in this review, social workers are not as present as maybe they should be, or as they definitely need to be, as I will argue. And I live with a social worker. I train social workers. I've watched our lovely, lovely students go out on placements. I've watched them try and do remote work during COVID. And I completely get how tired and worried and exhausted people are. COVID, relentless years of austerity, the hollowing out of services, the hollowing out of hope in communities, the hollowing out of a sense that there is a possibility that we can make the world a better place for the families we work with, and more generally, is just exhausting. So I completely get why people are tired and why this review may not seem like a priority. Moreover, and this is a general point as well as a very particular point to the review, last Sunday we saw a really sobering article in The Observer, some work they'd done with IPPR. Trust in this government is at an all-time low, and there are loads of reasons for it. And inevitably, the care review is, as Paul has already alluded to, is part of a wider, is itself problematic in terms of the way it was set up and the choice of personnel, etc. But also, I think perhaps we've had so many reviews in social work. I've been around a very, very long time, and I think the one particular review that I thought did a brilliant job of engaging social workers, and would be interesting to see what people think about this today, was Moira Gibbs' task force right back in 2009, 2010. But often these reviews have been seen as being by the great and the good, and have been seen as Westminster dominated and very far away from those of us up here in the north of England, for example. Having said all this, that I do understand why people aren't engaging, I want to argue that there are 3 reasons why you must engage. First of all, you can improve the current conversations, no end. Second, you can disrupt some of the current problematic conversations. And finally, you can help repair and restore some of the divisiveness by adding your voices, by joining with families, with service users, with care experienced people, with managers, with policymakers, with academics, with the trainers, with the researchers. By us all joining together, we can make this work in a better way. So first of all, how can social workers improve what's the current conversations? I've been struck throughout the review and in more recent days in the current tragic circumstances by how we just seem to accept that retention is just not good. It's like an act of God, well, there's no, we're really struggling to retain experienced social workers. We need social workers, and BASW has done a lot on this, but we need social workers to go into that review and explain why they leave, talk about what's going on, explain what would make a difference, give their ideas, co-produce solutions together. In some local authorities, I know that some small things have made a huge difference, but it's an upward battle for every local authority I know. It's an upward battle. We need to hear from social workers about why they are leaving, sadly, after periods in the job. So that's one thing. The second area I think that we can massively improve the conversation is there's a very complex and worrying narrative around which confuses what's called burdens on social workers, administrative burdens, it appears, with the rights of children and families to have democratically accountable services. And I think social workers during the pandemic, I did quite a lot of consultation with social workers during the pandemic, and the amount of creativity and the amount of really amazing practice that actually engaged young people who were in placements miles away, young people who were in foster placements, people were able to really disentangle what mattered, who needed to be communicated with, and what they needed to do. And so there is a great deal of good practice and imagination around how we can work with audit. Having said that, I do think that one of the things that's not on the agenda properly and that I would love social workers to engage with is, what are the consequences of our current Ofsted regime? What are the consequences of these inspections that end up with these still one-word inspections? I've seen the pain, the trauma, the shame, the harm that's been caused by inspections, and the churn of workers and the churn of agencies in their. I would love to hear more from social workers about how we could make inspection work in a more democratic, accountable and restorative way. The second thing I said, so they're just two areas. There is another area actually, which is very close to my own heart, which is, I really find it depressing that we're back again to that old hoary chestnut of we need to separate family support from child protection. That's just not how families work. We found in the Child Welfare Inequalities Project that every step increase in deprivation meant an increase in people's troubles. That if you did bring the reverse and helped people with a little bit more money, and we're finding now from the research across the world, a bit more support, you can reverse stuff. A bit of help, a pinch of help in time saves 9, as the old phrase goes. So people there aren't just these highly stressed families who need child protection and then the rest over there. People are complex, they move in and out of help and need and vulnerability, and good workers know that and work with the dynamic of care and support and control all the time. They don't see them as binaries. The other thing I want to say very briefly, and I'm very aware of the time, is I do think the social workers could be really helpful in disrupting a narrative that has emerged from the care review. It's really upset and offended a lot of people, this narrative that there are too many investigations and it's a runaway train. I happen to be of the view that we shouldn't be doing so much investigations. I am a family support person through and through. I happen to be of the view that we should go around in the main, there will always be deceitful, manipulative people, but in the main, most people are struggling, they're bad, they're in trouble, they need some help, and in the main, going around and offering a hand of support and help is the right way to engage them for their own sake and their children's sake. However, I think that the current focus on investigations by practitioners is highly rational. It's completely understandable. When you have an austerity project that has hollowed out every bit of help there is, when you still have risk aversion, when you still have Ofsted breathing down your neck, people play safe. Rick Hood's research has shown quite clearly the way in which practice priorities get skewed by austerity. So the current practice models we have are highly rational. I think they're really unhelpful. They worry me. But I think that this is where we need to challenge the narrative that social workers are going out investigating because they want to. They're going out investigating because there are a whole range of factors impelling them in that way. Finally, I just want to say, and this is a hopeful point, that in the adoption inquiry, as I said, commissioned by BASWA, a lot of people very angry about it. A lot of people didn't think that Anna Gupta and I were the right people to do it. We were seen as anti-adoption, etc. One of the things we put a lot of emphasis on was getting people who didn't normally talk to each other to talk to each other. So we got social workers, birth parents, adoptive parents, people who'd been adopted themselves, managers, policymakers together in one room, and we got them to communicate with each other. The world didn't become automatically a better place. We didn't have world peace, but we did have people really engaging and really hearing and understanding each other's perspectives. I think social workers need to get to the table, to be part of that bigger conversation around the care review, to bring their points of view. They're legitimate. I've already identified really clear points that they can bring, and I think it would really improve the current conversation immeasurably. I hope that people will make some time to do it. I totally get why people don't have the time to do it. It is such a shame that people are so exhausted by the current context in which they're working. Okay, I think that's me. Paul, if you can hear me okay.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Britt. Just what you were talking about in terms of, we need to make sure that the care review are aware of what matters in our practice. When I'm in practice, the things that really matter, that is a true reflection of the work that we do. And I love the notion of kind of, it's up to us to help improve, but also to disrupt, and to listen to each other as well, and use our social work skills, the ones that we have.
Exactly.
I'd like to now hand over to David Jackson, who's a care leaver, expert by experience, motivational speaker, just to hear his take on why it's important that social workers are aware of the review. So thank you, David.
Okay, so slightly different tack from Britt, because I'm not really here to sort of ask you to get involved with the care review. I'm really going to outline some reasons why I think you can't afford not to get involved with it. It's absolutely crucial that you're involved with it. And if we start at the beginning, there's a wake up and smell the coffee moment for you, and that is when you look at who they've appointed as the chair of this review, and they're calling it an independent review. It is anything but an independent review, and if you understand that, then it compels you to dig deeper. So the chair of the review headed up an organisation that has had over £70 million, I believe, in government funding for training of social workers, or the frontline organisation, whatever they want to call themselves and whatever they want to do. I believe the chair presented a blueprint for the future of social work to the government, which was widely accepted. I believe it was accepted by Michael Gove, who was heading up education at the time. And it's a privatisation agenda. And so there's your wake up moment. There's the smell the coffee moment. So let's kind of dig deeper now along that privatisation mode of thinking. The chair's been put there for a specific reason. There is an agenda within government, and you can't afford to ignore that agenda. It's as plain and simple as that. You are compelled to get involved because your future is on the line as much as the future of every child currently in care and those children who will come into care. Okay, the current agenda as it stands will deliver from this review policy, strategies, beliefs, whatever you want to call them, that will commodify children. It will turn them into balance sheet commodities for profit-making organisations, some of which are based in America, which again is another wake-up call for you. Why would private equity companies from across the Atlantic be interested in children's care in this country if it's not for profit? Private equity companies make profits for their holders, their equity stakeholders. It's as plain and simple as that. Now, the way they do that is that they've got to strip to the bone. They will come in and they asset strip the system. They're interested in only those children in care who have got the least amount of issues, the ones who can turn the most profit. And as we've seen so far, the government strategy is, wake them up, feed them, kick them out the door, bring them back in, feed them, put them to bed, and at 16, we'll kick them out of the front door. That's what these companies are after, a very simple process that allows them to maximize profit for the least amount of care, the commodification of our children. We have a government that doesn't care. We know that. They literally voted in Parliament not to feed children. They literally voted for that. That's not fiction. We've all seen that. Okay, so, where do you come into this little agenda then? Well, here's a vision of the future. And I've been involved in politics. I've been elected to public office on a number of occasions, and I've seen how these things work. The McAllister Review will deliver a whole host of strategies and policies aimed at privatisation, and they will cream off the best of what's available. and you will be left with what's left. Okay. Now, what happens then is he has to deliver this before the next general election. Okay, because the Conservatives can't bank on winning the next election. So he has to literally deliver these outcomes, and they have to get those contracts signed up and delivered before the next election, just in case they lose. So we'll turn the policies over if we win. That's Labour's attitude. That's not going to happen because you don't write contracts that you can turn over. You write them and you put so much liability and so much financial hardship into the act of withdrawing from a contract that it's not financially viable to do so. You sign 10, 20, 30-year contracts, liquidated damages for pulling out of them. Technical terms, but if you're involved in contracts, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah, they will not be able to pull out of these these contracts once they're signed up. That's why the rush is on. That's why McAllister is not being allowed to take 3-4 years like the Scottish Care Review did in order to deliver the care review. He has to do it before the next election, and they have to get the contract signed, because once they're signed, sealed and delivered, that's the end game. You're finished. Then what they do, if they do win the next general election, they'll come back in 2 years' time and they'll start pointing at the little bits that you got left with. The really difficult children, the children who need a little bit more input, the children potentially who have learning difficulties, the children who potentially need a more secure environment. All the bits that you've been left with, they will start pointing the finger at. And you just turn around and you simply say, oh, that's costing you £1 billion. And the government say, and then they turn around and say, well, we can do that for 600 million. And the government say, tell me more. And then they turn around and say, well, we can do it because you don't need qualified social workers with BA degrees and MAs and aspirations to do a PhD, because actually what they're doing is a support worker's role. And we'll employ those support workers. And then you're going to end up in a choice. You can either become a support worker or you can ship out. And either way suits them, because they can just trot down to the job centre and get support workers, and they'll just take £600 million a year from the government for doing so. That's how it works. Yeah, you can't afford to sit back now. It's not acceptable, in my view, that we've got social workers out there now who are openly stating they don't understand what the care review is about, what's happening with the care review, because the knowledge is out there. There's a saying, you know, in the age of information, ignorance is a choice. If you don't understand and you don't know about the care review, you've made a choice. It's not acceptable to be running around Twitter, okay, with passionate about children on your profile when you don't know about the care review and you don't understand it. There are some excellent, well-informed people on the care review looking at it. Okay, if you look at people like Nushra, highly involved, highly articulate, extremely intelligent, knows what's going on. Joe Hanley, excellent. Yeah, you need to detail the data, it's there. Dr. Donna Peach, the list is endless for people you can go to understand what's going on. And it's imperative that you get involved. Okay, because it's as much about you as it is about the children. Okay, we all have this thing, you know, it's about the children, it's about the children, it's about the children. You can't sit back and ignore the care review and still claim it's about the children. It's not acceptable. Okay, this care review is going to be one of the most damaging things to children's social care that I can imagine in my lifetime. And you will not be able to reverse the outcomes if you sit back and ignore it now. They have an agenda, okay? The agenda is as plain as the nose on everybody's face in this meeting. It's the privatisation of social care from top to bottom. And once these private equity companies are in there and they have their hands on that money, nobody has ever given up money willingly. Nobody gives up power willingly. Yeah, it has to be taken from them. And that gets harder and harder when you've got contracts involved. Okay, you really have to stand up, and you have to stand up now. Because if you do not stand up now, you don't get an opportunity to come back. Some of you, okay, if you're of a similar age to me, I'm 57 years old now. By the time this first wave of contracts are over, you're retired. You don't get another chance to come back. The younger ones who are potentially sat listening to this meeting, and your social work students, and you're hoping to qualify in a year or whatever it is and move out, you get to pick up the pieces in 15 years and start again. Yeah, you get to pick up the pieces. By then, the equity companies have had their money. People like Frontline have had their money. Yeah. This review is literally reviewing the failures of companies like Frontline, yeah, who were paid bucket loads of money to put this all right 10 years ago. Yeah. They're now being paid to review their own failures and make recommendations for how it can all be put right again. And guess what their answer is? Give us a bucket load more money. Yeah, we really, really, really cannot implore you any more than I am doing to get involved with the care review, to contact people like Joe, to contact people like Nusha, Dr. Peach, and the many others. Care Review Watch Alliance. Yeah, if you're not following that, you're not in the game. Yeah, if you are not following that account on Twitter, you are not an active participant in the game, in my opinion, because it's flowing through those people. It's flowing through that account. Yeah, you really, really need to be getting involved, following the right accounts, and adding your voice. There are MPs who we've got on our side. Emma Llewellyn-Buck, yeah, I believe she's an ex-social worker. You know, there's people there, but you have to add your voice, because your silence is complicity to the McAllister review. You accept, it's like abstaining in a vote. You're accepting whatever the outcome is. Yeah, you're accepting whatever's chucked at you. You're accepting the future that they give you, as opposed to driving your own destiny. You know, and every child in this country that's currently in care, okay, they're depending on you. Okay, they are literally depending on you to put this right. Yeah. So, you know, be in no doubt, silence is complicity. It's as simple as that. If you do not get involved, yeah, you're letting yourself down, and you're letting every child in this country down, because they're the people who are going to suffer. The children now and the children in the future who come into this system, who will be nothing more than one-line entries on somebody's balance sheet based in New York. Yeah, we really, really need you now to stand up and be counted, because it shouldn't be down to people like me or anybody, you know, care experienced people telling you, you know, the issues. Yeah, you're working in we lived those issues, but you're working in those issues now, and you must get involved. And that's pretty much all I've got to say on the matter. You know, just please get involved and start helping with this effort, because it's a monumental effort, and we can't afford to fail. It's as simple as that. We can't afford to fail.
Thank you, David. As David said, silence is complicity. We've all got to recognise that. The care review is something that the more that I knew about it, and the context of the care review, the more that I've had sleepless nights about it. I've had real concerns about it, and maybe I don't share some of the concerns as many of the concerns as other people. Maybe I do, but this is stuff that should be worrying us. You know, possibilities should be worrying us. Silence is complicit. We know context is important. We know social work is political. We know that the processes for the care of our children, the process, social work will be a political choice. So we must get involved. Okay, so thanks, David. So next, we speak to Senior Practitioner Patrice Benedict. And she'll also tell us why it's so important for social workers, especially those in practice, to understand the relevance of the review.
Thanks, Paul. Hi, everyone. I'm Patrice Benedict. I am a senior practitioner in the Looked After Children's team at Camden. I'm also part of BASWA's Black and Ethnic Professional Symposium. I'm coming today to talk to you guys about why I'm passionate about the review and why I think you all need to be passionate too. So much has already been said that is resonating with me. But I just want to start by saying thank you, because this is a lunch hour and I know, as I'm frontline, how intense social work is at the moment. I described it as being like the most challenging I think I've seen it in a very, very long time. And so I'm very appreciative for everyone to take the time out today. Next slide, please, Lisa. So why do I care about the independent review? I trained at Goldsmiths and currently being at Camden, which is like such a systemic borough. I am fueled by community. I live for the young people and the children that I support and their families. I have been qualified for 8.5 years, been working with children and families for about 15. And I have seen a significant change. I also have seen so much that we have gone through as practitioners, multiple different levels. And I'm fueled by a level of activism, I think, because of having trained at Goldsmiths and the things that I'm passionate about. I write and public speak on matters to do with social injustice and anti-racist practice on a regular basis. And so for me, this is a perfect opportunity for us to start talking about some of the issues that we find in our everyday practice. I'm also part of BAS's Independent Review Children's Social Care Steering Group. We have come together, a multicultural group of practitioners that sit on multiple levels and different spaces within social work, and we ultimately advocate for BASWA members and their views in relation to the review. We have comprised the 10 priorities, and we are pushing this to be thought about in the final recommendations of the review. I know Becca's already sent the link, so if you go through the chat, and I know Paul will send these links after also, but these priorities, 10 priorities, have been embedded in all of our responses thus far, and we are trying to hold the review to account in terms of ensuring that they're covering those 10 priorities and thinking about all of the really important aspects of social work that we just feel are not being thought about enough. This is a perfect way to connect with BASWA and connect with the review through us and through the 10 priorities, and make sure that your voice is heard so we can push that forward. Next slide, please, Lisa. So why should social workers care? I mean, we've spoken about so much already today, so I'm going to try my best not to repeat. But the main thing for me is we have conversations on a regular basis about things that we are not happy about, things that we feel need to change. And with this review taking place, we need to make sure that we are voicing those opinions and those views in the correct way, in the correct channels, to make sure that they're embedded in the review throughout, and they're thought about in the recommendations at the end. I think something that has been mentioned before, but it's really key that this review is going to take place regardless. And it's about us taking a hand of it as much as possible, getting a grip of it as much as possible, instead of sitting and allowing this change to happen to us without us being a part or having a say. One thing that we all know is social workers and practitioners are portrayed as negatively. There's a huge amount of negative stereotypes and stigma connected to our role and our passion that is completely unrealistic. And I would like to think, as an optimistic person, that this is a chance for us to change that. I think if we come together in numbers and we really advocate for ourselves, we may have a chance to stand up for our profession and paint a true picture of who we are. Most leaders, as we know, even heading up the review, most leaders are not qualified social workers or practitioners in the same way that we are. And therefore, we need to advocate for the families that we're supporting. We need to advocate for the children there, and the services, the community that support them, and really highlight what we know that they need, because we are in practice and we have been in practice for years. A huge thing for me is about the amount of blame and shame that happens when it comes to serious case reviews, or when it happens when negative outcomes take place for children. Social workers and local authorities are often to blame for these things. I really believe that further discussions around the impact of the emotional, mental labour, the toll that has on us and how that impacts our work, the political issues, the economic issues, systemic and systematic issues that occur around us as practitioners that impact us doing our job, and impact the decisions that we get to make, the red tape, the glass ceilings, how all of this impacts our day-to-day, and the lack of support that we have in kind of healing through that and moving on to the next family, moving on to the next child. And of course, there's a huge one, and we talk about anti-oppressive practice and anti-discriminatory practice and anti-racist practice more recently in using that term, but ultimately it's to ensure that the ethics, the values of social work are embedded throughout this review and embedded throughout the final recommendations, because there's a huge worry that this is going to be left behind. We've had to push these conversations so much historically and presently, and really thinking about, some of you may have heard me speak about social racism and intersectionality before, but really thinking about all of the aspects of the individuals that we support, and to make sure that those things are thought about, to make sure that when the recommendations are put forward, we can think creatively about how that is impacting each individual family. Yeah, next slide, please. So what does all this mean? I think in a nutshell, we don't know. We can't ever truly be sure how this is going to impact our practice. But some of the things that we've spoken about already, and some of the things that we have been discussing, legislation changes, what is it going to mean for us in terms of how we execute our practice under the law? Funding changes, where will money be spent, will money be cut, what does this look like in terms of our practice and us being creative with our families? We know that with funding changes this far and changes around universal credit and other benefits, I know for sure for me, I've had to be very creative in supporting some of my families and supporting the social workers that I manage to support their families. Internal structures and responsibilities. We know that there's going to be huge changes potentially within local authorities, within your teams. This will have an impact on the responsibilities you may have as a social worker and as a practitioner. And I'm going to link this to some of the points below, but the one thing for me is I really love my job. I love having to think about theory and legislation and combining this with support and being creative. I have the space to be really creative where I am and practicing where I am. And I'm really mindful that the role that we know, the social work role we know, and what our training, what we've done, it could be completely scrapped, it could completely change, and we may not love the role that we in the same way. May not love the role in the same way, and it kind of goes back to what I was saying before about really taking ownership and taking a stand and standing up for what your role is, standing up for your profession. One of the things we've been talking about is nationalizing social work, which could mean that there's one model of social work or one way to do social work, and I really don't practice like that. You know, community social work is about tailoring your role and tailoring your practice to the family, to that child, and being creative. That could go with a central system. It could mean that all social work, child protection matters and safeguarding matters end up being in one place and kind of dished out, and it could remove that element of support that you would offer to families and end up being, like I see it, being like a factory where you're churning out assessments and you're not able to even assess holistically. They then become very narrow visioned and very restricted. And then, you know, outsourcing and deregulating, you know, for me, it would be that we would be de-skilling a lot of our practitioners. You wouldn't have the possibility or the opportunities to work in the way, like I've said that before, but for the newly qualified social workers and the students, they wouldn't be trained in the same way. It could mean that the support workers that are out there or will be out there in the future could be less skilled, paid less. You could be paid less. It's just there's just so many unknowns. Like I've said, there's so many unknowns, but these are the worries and the things that we're thinking about in terms of the negative implications. And it's really about us coming together and voicing those concerns, and more importantly, voicing what we know we need as practitioners, but also what the community needs. I hope that was coherent. There's a lot of passion. I can feel like there's a lot of passion from other practitioners also, but and it's trying to contain that, because sitting in the steering group and talking to social workers in my team and surrounding, it's a very worrying time. So I guess I'm just urging you to please get involved. Please connect with us on Twitter, please message, and we can link you in to other people also.
Thank you, Patrice. And the thing about emotional labour is, I think that's often kind of forgotten. I recently just returned to some practice after some time in kind of research, and I just forgot how much emotional labour it takes and social work takes. But and I know that we can get trained, but this is really important. We must protect what it means to be a social worker, what social work means, that we're grounded in ethics, we're grounded in values, social rights. That's why I love my job. That's why I love social work. That's why we should all be standing up for the work that we actually do, making sure that's really is reflected. Because we should be standing up for the great work that we do. Okay, so what we're going to do now is just going to have 10 minutes for questions. Please feel free to kind of share comments and questions and reflections in the chat. I've put up, sorry, Lisa, thank you. There's just some ways to engage in the care review. So there's some links there. I'm not sure if they'll work, but we'll make sure that I kind of share them in different ways through different mediums. There is a call for ideas. That's 250 words by 5 p.m. on the 15th of December. and it's 250 words, which I don't think is enough, but it's really important that we do engage in that. There's other ways that you can engage, either through BASWA, through the Care Review Watch Alliance, through different forums, and through the Care Review itself. So I just wanted to start with a couple of questions. Does anyone have a question? One of my questions, I guess, is just, this seems like a really political thing, and social work, and I know sometimes there's discussion about social work, whether social work should be political or not. It is a political, social work will always be political. But I suppose my question to someone from the panel is just, how can we ensure that we can be political and yet be fair? How can we ensure that we can engage politically with the review and with social work? Someone have any answers?
Do you need to engage fairly? Politics isn't about being fair. Politics is about getting what you want, what you need, what you have to deliver. Yeah, I don't think for 1 second that the government have any intentions of playing fair. They've demonstrated that by appointing McAllister as the chair of the review. That's all you need to know. They're not going to play fair. They've got an agenda. They intend to deliver it. That's the politics of the day. You don't need to be fair. You need to get what you need to get. You know, it's at the risk of sounding a little bit negative, okay, in relation to the social work profession, sometimes we have to dispense with some of the kind of fluffy, woolly comfort stuff. And you have to get down to the naked truth of what's going on. You know, this is not a time for soft shoes. This is a time for jackboots, because that's what they're kicking you with. And you need to stand up and you need to fight against that.
Does anyone else want to come in? Britt, you're on mute.
I'm probably going to be a bit unpopular here now, but I'm going to start with the evidence from the work I have done over the years with families. We do need to change things in social work. We do need to change things in child protection. We don't have a very humane, fair system a lot of the time. Children don't always get heard. Mothers who experience domestic abuse are often really doubly penalised by our systems. We need to look at risk aversion. We need to look at, it's not all just about austerity. Austerity has made things about 1,000 million times worse, but the problems have been there for quite a while. So I'm not standing here saying, oh, it's all fine, it's just this awful care review. I think the care review and some of the people involved at the care review are genuinely trying to engage with some very complex issues. There are really important issues about how we make sure that we support families who are often terrified of us, how we protect children. I know you don't want to talk about what happened last week, and I completely appreciate that, but we need to think about how do we build a system where we support the majority of decent, caring families, whilst being also able to understand and appreciate the risks that some children. It's a very complex job, and we need a lot more help with it. And I think to just go down the road of saying, oh, the care review is terrible, and not hear some of the things they're saying and some of the things that they want to engage with is important. Yeah, so I suppose I start with the evidence. The evidence tells me we do need to change things. The care review is not a good vehicle, but it's one of the vehicles we have at the minute, and we should be in there trying to influence it.
I would agree, hence why I think I had mentioned that it's key to get involved, because regardless, the review is going to happen, it's happening, and there will be changes, there will be recommendations, and I think it's up to us to be involved and engage properly, thoroughly, be committed to it, to say also that we've done our best, or attempted our best when the outcomes come into play. It's not a perfect system. I don't know what that perfect system is. I don't know if it exists. I think there is a huge element of the individual's practice that comes into that. I think the legislation and the system is one thing, and then the individual is another, and how creative you are with that, what you're given in your local authority and in your team, I think is sometimes dependent on you as a social worker and your management. And then caseloads and everything else, as we know, impacts the ability to think, to be creative, to heal, because this is a hugely traumatic job that we're doing. And dependent on what you see, depending on your local authority, that where you're based, and your team would also differ in trauma. So it's really difficult to take a step back, and I know that everyone is very busy and probably very much under it, needing healing, needing a break from COVID. It's crazy. I don't know, but there needs to be some space to think about what is needed for the individual workers as well as the system.
Great, thank you. And I kind of agree that actually, you know, we need to, I mean, that is the reason why we have to engage with this review, no matter what our thoughts of it, because it has to truly reflect. And there's some questions here about, is the review just looking at what's gone right and what's gone wrong? What about things like funding, for example? And I guess my answer to that is that we have to hold the review accountable. No matter what we think about the review, we have to hold the review accountable to make sure that it reflects what matters to us in terms of our profession, but also that make sure that it matters in terms of the children and the families that we work with. It's all about accountability, and that's the bit that we should be doing.
Don't you think, though, Paul, that we've all got to be accountable? Us academics, us researchers, us training the students. You know, all of us need to be accountable. This, as Patrice says, this is probably one of the most important jobs in society. The welfare and safety of children depends on split instance judgments, and so we all need to be accountable. I hold no brief for the review in many ways. I think in many ways it is a wasted opportunity, but we did need a review. We do need to talk about these things, and it is good to do things when we're not focused on the death of a child. It's not, this review has not been a knee-jerk one. It has been one that's been about looking at the breadth of it. I think it's been done badly. I personally am a big fan of restorative practice. I think there were all sorts of things from restorative practice that could have been used to open up discussion. In restorative practice, sorry, I'll stop now. Restorative practice, you name harms, you name wrongs. It comes from injustice, from challenging injustice, and then you go on to repair and heal. And the review, sadly, and the process around it hasn't been doing that. But we can try, we can bring our relationship-based practice, our skills into that, and try and repair and heal in a robust way.
Can I just say, everything that you're saying is great, but let me just bring you back to something. You're late to the game, and it's almost over.
Well, forgive me, but I've actually sent 2 long submissions.
No, I'm not talking about you personally, Britt.
Yeah.
I'm just
Oh, yeah. Sure.
Yeah. You're late to the game, and it's almost over. You've got to get involved now. You've got to get involved hard, and you've got to drive it. Yeah, because a lot of the concerns, and Britt's just made some excellent points there. I have no argument with it, but a lot of that is for after. There's a battle to be won first before any of that becomes relevant. You've got to win that battle, okay? You're late to the game.
Okay. Right, so here we go. We're getting quite rightly very passionate about this, and that's really good. I want to thank everyone just for their time and their support today. And I just want to once again encourage you to look at BASWA's response to the case of change, visit the reviews website, the Care Review Watch Alliance. Get involved in what people are saying in terms of what people are saying in the press. Look at the history, look at social work history, look at all of these things, see the direction, make up your own mind. That's what we're asking you to do. so that you can get involved in this. Also, what would be really helpful is that actually you tell at least 3 people that you know, 3 people that you're working with, that about this forum, so that people are informed, people get passionate about the care review, and that would be really, really helpful. So spread the word. Lastly, this is related, well, it's slightly unrelated, but also related. Can I please ask people to sign the commitment to sign Article 39's petition today? So they need 10k signatures by next Thursday to take down to Downing Street, and they're currently about 2,500 short. So again, just approach 3 people would be really, really amazing. It doesn't take long, and it will make such a big difference. So thank you again for the speakers. Thank you everyone for taking part and sitting and listening. It's very, very much appreciated, and we will be in touch. Please be in touch with us as well. Thank you.